Hello, friends. For the better part of a decade, the Legacy Archive Project has been formally collecting and cataloging video interviews with influential figures in the field of gifted ed, building on interviews obtained since the early 2000s. This year, the Conceptual Foundations Network is highlighting 4 scholars who represent not only strong individual contributions to the field, but who also studied under one another as they pursued their doctoral work. This collection of 4 interviews is intended to highlight the generational nature of thought contribution as it impacts practice. My name is Chris Wiley, and I'm the current chair of Conceptual Foundations Network. I'm here today with Dr. Jonathan Plucker, a past president of the National Association for Gifted Children and prolific scholar in the field. Dr. Plucker is a professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Education, where he also serves as the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. Previously, he served as the Julian C. Stanley Endowed Professor of Talent Development at Johns Hopkins, the Raymond Neag Endowed Professor at the University of Connecticut, and a professor of educational psychology and cognitive science at Indiana University. During his time at Indiana, he was also the founding director of the Center for Evaluation and Evaluation Policy. He graduated with a BS in chemistry ed and an MA in ed psych from the University of Connecticut. Then, after briefly teaching at an elementary school in New York, he received his Ph.D. in ed psych from the University of Virginia. He's an APA, APS, AERA, and AAAS fellow, and recipient of both the 2012 Arnhem Award for Outstanding Achievement in the Psychology of Creativity and the 2013 Distinguished Scholar Award from NAGC. Welcome, Jonathan, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Chris. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. As I have suggested, I only have a few questions for you, but I suspect we will walk the field a bit around each of these questions. So let's kick off with the first one. There are a lot of influences on a young scholar's work as they exit their doctoral program and begin to define themselves in the field. But often the philosophical frameworks of specific individuals resonate more deeply through our initial work. It seems as if Carolyn Callahan was such a figure for you, initially influencing the direction and nature of your scholarship in gifted education. I wonder if you would take a moment to share with us how you perceived Carolyn's scholarship when you studied together, and then how her scholarship informed your work that you pursued in your early career.
The way I plan to answer it, I'm actually changing my mind now as you were asking.
What could go wrong?
I think I want to answer this differently now. I mean, I was looking for a doctoral program that would give me different sorts of experiences that I had up to that point. I had a great UConn education, working with Joe Renzulli, especially Sally Reese, Gene Gubbins, and I was just looking for something a little bit different. I didn't want to get all my degrees at the same university, which I think was smart. And so where to go? And I can't remember who I was talking to. I think I remember, but I don't want to drop a name and be wrong about it. But I was talking to someone who was kind of tangential to the field, but a fairly big name outside of it, but also within the education world. And he was asking me at a conference or something where I was thinking about going to get my doctorate. And I listed some possibilities, and I listed Virginia, and he cut me off and said, "Oh, wow, I have loved the work that's come out of the National Research Center site at Virginia. It's just really interesting. It's pragmatic, but really, sort of conceptually grounded. They're like studies that they have ongoing are really interesting. You would learn a lot from Carolyn and her colleagues." And that wasn't the deciding factor, but that was a pretty big factor to hear someone give an solicited endorsement. And so I started talking to Carolyn. We had a couple phone conversations. This was a while ago, so it was landline phones, no real internet, no cell phones. And I remember where I was when I finally made my decision and called her, and she was really excited, which made me think, oh, I made a really good decision. And then what I liked was that Carolyn, and this has been hugely influential on me, She didn't say, okay, like you need to do my stuff. It was very much, find what you're passionate about, go for it. Just, let us help you learn how to do it really, really well. And uh, I knew she was doing that at the time. It was implied, but also fairly obvious. And I have always tried to carry that through with my own students. I also thought Carolyn was not a hand holder. And I honestly don't know. It's going to be fascinating to see Carolyn's comments because we talk all the time. We've never really talked about this stuff, and so it's fascinating to me. I'm really interested on what she and Anne are going to say. But it was clear that if you needed hand holding, you should go to a different doctoral program. Like Carolyn's philosophy was very clearly stated, like you need to be able to spread your wings on your own as soon as you leave here. If you need to be coddled and really helped through every step of the program, how on earth are you going to be able to take flight? And at least for me, that made a lot of sense to me. I was young when I came through the program. She worked hard to find me really challenging opportunities. I was in the library. The classes hadn't even started yet, I don't think. So it was like right before classes started. I was just reading journal articles because I was a bit of a nerd, right? And it was also probably late August in Charlottesville, Virginia. So it was like 120 degrees outside and humid. So I was sitting in the, library cooling off, just, reading the latest journal issues. And all of a sudden, Carolyn's standing right next to me. And she said, Professor so-and-so has decided to do an accelerated stats sequence. It's for the school psych students, but he has a couple open slots. He asked me if I have anyone. I think you would really like this professor, and I think this would be perfect for you. And like, I had a math background, so I was like, yes, let's do it. And that's how I met Professor Ball, and we did hit it off. And he taught stats like I think, so it was perfect. But the fact that she went and found me, again, we don't have cell phones, we don't have email really. Like she came and found me and said, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for you. I really want you to seriously consider this. I mean, before she finished describing it to me, I was like, yeah, sign me up. Let's do this. But she was always looking for things like that. She didn't handhold me and say, I'm going to sign you up for this. Or it was, think about it. Here's why it's good. It's up to you. Just really being a great opportunity provider, but also giving me lots of space through trial and error to screw things up. And I screwed some huge things up when I was there. How she was as patient with me as she was is a miracle.
Well, I look forward to talking about some of those screw ups. We'll bring those up. And
some of the stupid mistakes I made, but so she just gave us lots of space, but it wasn't like you weren't on your own. Like I knew she was watching. If I went to her and asked advice, she clearly knew what I was talking about right away. It's like I knew she was watching. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She still to this day does not sugarcoat anything with me. If I'm calling her up now, and I still call her all the time, ask for advice, we will talk through it and she will tell me what I've done wrong. And then she'll give me some possible solutions. It's always a helpful conversation. And it's the same basic pattern that we've had since I was there in early 90s. So those are things I've always appreciated. I was also young, and so I was brash and idealistic, and sometimes I felt like I did need coddling, and she helped me learn actually I don't sometimes. And at the time, I'm not going to say I was thrilled by stuff like that, but it wasn't soon after I graduated where I was like, oh yeah, no, like I'm actually much better prepared than many of my fellow assistant professors are. Like I know how to solve problems on my own. I know how to, be professional on my own. Like I don't I know how to build a network on my own. And again, I've tried to model that with my own students, and you'll talk to one of them to see how well I did. But.
That's right. So the early 90s, you gave us a couple of clues and you gave us the date, right? No cell phones, some wall hangers there. What did gifted education look like as you graduated into the field to become a young scholar? What was going on? And how did she fit in, and how did you fit in?
Oh boy, that's a really interesting wrinkle on it. Let me answer the first part. How we fit in is tricky. Kind of already talked about it a little bit, but I still sort of see it. Historically, I'd kind of call it the golden age of the field in some ways. I think the field has advanced in really important, awesome ways since. Do not get me wrong, but like many of sort of the classic lions of the field were sort of at the peak of their influence, just doing amazing work. But it was very, it was, I don't know what the right word is. There was the Renzulli Reese school of thought. There was Joyce Van Tasselbasker. I mean, John Feldhusen was still very, very active. Passow, Stanley, right? Like legends, and they all had their things. And and when you went to study with them, you knew what you would be getting into, and that obviously worked great for the field for a long, long time. And we've kind of moved away from that a little bit. And again, what I kind of liked about Virginia was, I mean, I got to take classes and work with Carolyn Callahan, Carol Tomlinson, Donna Ford, Tanya Moon. I mean, like the lineup is amazing. But it wasn't like you didn't go to Virginia to learn about the Callahan model or the Tomlinson model, right? It was a little broader than that. It was to sort of take your own interests and figure out how to build your own thing. And that's where the field in general, I think, has gone, which I think is working for us. Great. But I think you can underemphasize how big of a change that was in many, many ways. And not sure I answered that terribly well, but that's kind of how I see the history of the field. And I have no idea where it's really going, but I think we're all kind of figuring that out, right? But I think with the benefit of hindsight, that's what, 30 years ago now, which, man, I had not thought about how long ago that was. 30 years ago. And it's very, very different now. And not, I mean, maybe not better or worse, but just, different. And where our work fits into it, I think something Carolyn has also done. And again, I consider myself blessed to have worked with the people in Virginia that I did, to have the peers there that I did. And I learned so much from everybody. I've mentioned Professor Ball. He was hugely influential on me. Several other professors were, Brenda Lloyd, others. I just learned a ton from all of them. But I had fantastic peers that I was working with in my courses. We would do that nerdy thing where we would leave class and we would go hang out for 2 hours and talk about that one sentence that the professor said that got us all riled up, and we would argue about it. And kind of like classic old school, this is what everyone thinks a doctoral program is. I actually had that. And it was so good just to have peers help you figure stuff out, tell you that that you're wrong. There's sort of better ways to think about those things. So man, I don't know what got me talking about that, Chris. That's so far from your original question, but it this is a semi-structured interview, right? So we get to go wherever we need to go.
That's right.
I don't think I really have much to add there, other than I did learn from so many people. I heading in the direction of, Carolyn is still probably one of the people that I collaborate with the most now. And it's because we have common interests, which is interesting because at the time, I'm not so sure we did. And she was totally cool with that. I was cool with that. I still learned a ton about a lot of great stuff. But over time, our, interests have kind of done this, which is interesting. And we still work together on projects all the time. We were talking a couple weeks ago about a project that we've been working on for some time that we're trying to get to the finish line. So it has been a really great relationship, and I've certainly benefited from it.
Well, I think if our viewers have not yet watched Carolyn's interview as part of this series, they should probably go do so. A lot of what she said lines up with I'm getting a sense from you of she was a master of many paths, and she didn't forge a school around a specific conceptual direction, but rather just lent capacity and allowed you to sort of do your own thing, just as she has transformed over the course of a multi-decade career. So a lot of what you're saying lines up with her perception of how her career has developed.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. So I might poke you a little bit on the so clearly the field is changing. I think even in my short time as a scholar in gifted education, we've changed emphases. And for me, in some highly productive ways. Ironically, what seemed like grand changes, in particular on cultural responsiveness and awareness of populations that didn't match profiles that were sort of standardized in the research. She, of course, was doing that in the 70s and 80s. But I think we've got new language and maybe new energy behind it. And I wonder, since you were actually president of NAGC, I wonder if you might just for a few minutes focus in on that particular transformation in NAGC and the scholarly field surrounding underrepresentation and identification, and just give your perception, not necessarily evaluating the work, but how, maybe characterize a little bit how the field has morphed.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Chris. I mean, maybe counterintuitively, those issues have never not been the primary emphasis of the field the entire time that I've been in it, which has been 32, 33 years, probably about 33 years. Those have never not been the most important issues. And so sometimes when people are like, oh, the field's finally getting serious about this, it's like, what the hell do you think we were doing in 1990? Like, the Javits program went into effect, 91, 92, I think money first started being spent. I was there as a master's student and actually as an undergraduate work study student at UConn. Like, Javits was focused like a laser on these issues. Like, they have always been the top issues for the field. They're always there. Much like they're there in every other aspect of public policy and public life in this country. They are for many countries. I've been blessed to travel the world and work in schools and communities all over the planet. These issues are just much more important in this country than they are in lots of other countries. And they will always be with us. We're never going to get there. But we keep making progress. I think the exciting part is that, yes, we can keep talking about it. Like, we've learned so much, especially in the last 15 to 20 years, let's say. We have learned so much about actual school and community-based interventions that actually start to get us closer to solving these problems. Again, we're never going to quote unquote solve them. There is no finish line. But we need to make a lot more progress quickly. The progress we've made, like, we have the tools now to go into any setting and help people do this exponentially better. Not just incrementally, but like much, much better certainly than a generation ago. But even 5 or 6 years ago, we learned so much about universal screening, teacher recommendations, how to do that stuff better, using a local norms approach, social and emotional stuff. Like we've learned so much in a relatively short period of time, in part because the field has gotten bigger, right? Because all academic fields have gotten a little bit bigger as the population grows, and I think a lot more K-12 educators are very passionate about finding solutions to these problems and not accepting the status quo. We've learned so much about curriculum, identification. I could go on and on and on. We also know what generally doesn't work all that, and we have a much better sense of which interventions probably aren't very efficient. They're just way too hard to do. And so I think that's the big change. Whenever I hear people say, oh, it's so nice that the field's finally paying attention to this stuff. I was like, I remember sitting in on doctoral seminars when I was a master's student at Connecticut. And Joe and Sally would be talking about these issues and how these were the most important, the most vexing issues of the day. And there would be spirited discussions, passionate educators that I would be listening to, just soaking up all their knowledge. So that hasn't changed over time. What we know about how to address the problem, we are so much better off than we were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, certainly 30 years ago. So I think that's the big change. A lot of my UConn and especially Virginia colleagues have had a really big role in doing lots of those studies. And, Carolyn certainly first among them. So all the things we've learned about pre-differentiated curriculum, the work that she and Amy Azzano have done, among others, that is world-class work, in both in its quality and in its practical implications. So there's just, I think we've just learned so much. The issue is, how do we get it into schools?
Right.
Especially when many educators, especially when many principals and superintendents in their prep programs are either not taught anything about advanced education at all, or if they're taught anything, it's that it doesn't work and that it's a bad thing. And neither of those things are true at all. But it does make it harder for us to get these, conceptually grounded, empirically tested strategies into schools and classrooms when there is sort of an intellectual pushback, pretty much, I wouldn't say intellectual, ideological is probably the better word, right? Like, how do we fight that? Because that's what I find myself fighting in school districts every single day is, well, we really want to do this, but the principal says all gifted ed is bad. It's like, okay, well, we're going to have to start with the principal because there's not much we can do if they don't want it in their school. But once we can get it in their school, and this is why I'm optimistic about the future of the field, once we get it in, this stuff works really well. And in many cases, very quickly. So it does start to sell itself, but we've got to get it in there. That's the challenge for the field over the next decade or so is, to keep learning, but at the same time, we've learned stuff that really helps. It's like, to me, if they're doing a big medical clinical trial, if let's say they're testing a new drug, if the drug looks like it's harming people, they stop the trial. If the drug looks like it's working much better than people thought, they will accelerate the trial to get the drug out there faster, as long as it looks like it's safe. They keep doing the study, but they also move to actual implementation much, much, much faster. And quite frankly, we used that mechanism many times during the pandemic, where something looked very promising. They kept studying it, but they also pushed it into people's, homes much faster. And it literally saved millions of lives, right? And while our stuff doesn't save millions of lives, I like to think it really helps millions of lives, though. We need to keep doing these studies, but what we're learning is so positive along the way. Like, why you would not universally screen in some way, shape, or form in this point? Like, do we totally have universal screening totally pinned down where we know the best way to do it in each context and why it works? Nah. Do we know 80% of that? Absolutely. That's enough for us to be doing it while we still do these studies. That's the inflection point that I think we're at for lots of this stuff.
All right. Well, there's a lot of wisdom there. And I think especially teachers in training and scholars in training watching this probably will end up asking that question. Have theorists, going back to Joe and Sally, been discussing this and just unable to then push implementation into a broad representation in the field? And if so, what's the linchpin? Like, how do we change that? And I have heard from you, and I'd be interested in your feedback on this. I've heard from you, part of it is about society coming along and educators on the ground getting passionate about this topic. Sounds like a piece of it is we need to push in the same way that we constantly endeavor to push gifted or talented advanced academics into teacher preparation. And sometimes that's an uphill fight. It sounds like we also need to engage the uphill fight to get that into ed specialist degree and administrator programs, even hopefully beyond the single lecture, but maybe even the single lecture would be an improvement. Is there anything else, given how you have taken theory to practice, is there anything else in your brain that a young scholar in particular could take out there when they know they don't want to fall into the pit of developing great knowledge into an echo chamber, but rather want to keep a foot on the ground? Any other advice for that?
Chris, I would say if I were a scholar entering the field, I wouldn't worry about that much, to be perfectly honest. I think that's on people like Carolyn and me. I don't think that's on a junior scholar. I think you need to get your stuff straightened out. I think you need to make sure you've got your conceptual work solid. I think you need to do some good empirical studies to show that you're adding to what we're learning. If you could translate it into practice, that's great. But a trap I see people make is they immediately start trying to translate everything into practice. That may be great and get you lots of consultant jobs early on, but then that dries up because you don't have new stuff. And like, where's your competitive advantage in the war of ideas, which is kind of how I view higher education, right? Like, we're always trying to come up with better ideas. You can see people's careers that just go boom, like a rocket. And 5 years later, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I used to talk to that person at every single conference. I don't think I've seen him in a conference in 3 years. What the heck happened? Just, doing really good quality work, getting your work off to a really good start, becoming an expert in 2 or 3 different areas to really build up your skill set, constantly learning from people, learning. Then you get later in the game where, if I never publish another thing again, the world's going to keep rotating just fine. It's not going to hurt my career or family in any way, shape, or form, right? So I can spend most of my time working with school districts, working with after-school providers, working with community leaders, which is how I probably spend, I'd say, I wouldn't say half of my time, but pretty darn close to it. I can afford to do that now because I don't need to worry about that other stuff, right? And I think pushing too fast into I'm making the world a better place. Well, there's lots of different ways to make the world a better place. How you do it over time can and should change, right? Your career evolves. Joe Renzulli and I had that conversation once, and he was like, your career is going to look different in 20 years than it looks now. It's supposed to. Carol and I have still to this day have this conversation all the time, which is I will, call her up and say, "Oh, this thing happened. What should I do? Like, why is it bothering me?" Just, well, it's bothering you because it's different, but you're sort of on the cusp of that next phase of your career. You need to embrace it, not fight it. Fantastic advice. I had a department chair when I was at Indiana, Dan Mueller. And I went to him once and he said, "Wow, you had a great year." And I said, "Yes, I've never written so much in my life." But I said it in a way that made him go, why did you just say that like it was a defeat? And I go, "Well, I didn't write most of the words. Like, my team wrote the words, everyone working on my grants and my doctoral students." And he actually got angry with me. And he was like, "That is one of the most naive things I've ever heard. Do you honestly think you were going to move to the next phase of your career doing everything exactly the same way you did it before?" He's like, "That's actually a sign that things aren't going well. If you don't have a team, if you don't have great doctoral students, if you don't have great postdocs and research faculty who are working on your projects with you," he's like, that's actually bad. And so, a combination of all of my mentors giving me this, advice that your career is going to look different as you move forward. And one of those things for me, and it's different for everybody, right? For me, it's because I focused on other things earlier, I have the luxury now to still do some of that work, which I still enjoy immensely, but I do less of it. And I spend much more time actually working with practitioners, sharing what we've learned, learning for them about the contextual variables, whether things work as well in practice as they do in, all these various studies we do. And I don't know what the next stage is after that, but I'm sure there's going to be another one. Maybe it's one where I'm just focusing on that. So again, a little bit counterintuitive to say, don't worry about that too much early on, but I actually wouldn't worry about that too much early on. I think it's a distraction. And I think it hurts you long term if you want to stay in this world long term.
Right. Well, thanks for that. I think that's a nice tee up to focus a little bit on a specific phase of your life whenever you produced another doc student that we're going to be interviewing as part of this series, Anne Rinn. So we're going to be asking Anne the same question we asked you about Carolyn, about her characterization of your work as she graduated into the field, and how it influenced her. And so, as our maybe final question of the interview, I wonder if you would take a shot at what you think Anne's going to say about your scholarship when she was with you and how it influenced her as she went into the field.
I mean, I knew this question was coming, and I don't have much actually. So it's hard. This is hard for me to answer. And I mean, first of all, I have been blessed with amazing doctoral students. I don't think I think I just got lucky in many, many, many ways. Like, when Anne showed up, she was visiting campus. I think she and her dad were visiting Bloomington. They came in and talked to me. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. I can't even imagine. She probably doesn't want me saying how long ago it was anyway, but it was a while ago. And I remember how we were sitting. I remembered our conversation. I believe she was considering like nursing and then sort of decided to take this pivot. It was clear she was very smart. We had just enough overlap in interests that it made perfect sense. I thought for her to come and study with us. She clearly was a person who liked to be a go-getter, etc. And I think at that point, I mean, it's hard to go back at a point in time, right? And the advisor I am now is not the advisor I was then. The advisor I was then was not the advisor I was when I started. And so, sort of going back in that development and saying, "Oh, I was like this at that point," probably rose-colored glasses. With all my students, and I don't know if I should even admit this, I remember the mistakes I made. And I did some things really, really well. And there are other things I just wasn't very good at, and I really needed to work at them. I actually love people. I'm sort of a touchy-feely guy. Um, and I think sometimes I came across a little bit cold to them when they were struggling with stuff. I really wanted them to figure it out on their own. And like every student, ran into some hurdles that she had to jump over. Some she leapt over easily. Some she, struggled with, like, 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 like we all do. Um, uh, she was a fantastic student. She did a really good job. Was I there enough for her socially and emotionally to help her through some of the difficult times that we all face? I think I did a pretty good job providing opportunities, making sure she was developing the independent skills she needed. But again, I didn't do that much because she was such a talented person. Um, but was I there enough for her when she really needed me to be? That's a question for all my doctoral students that you can never answer. I do tend to worry about that, even though it's been a number of years for all of them now. Is what was I there enough for them? And I think so. They still talk to me, so that's
They're still doing the work. They
they're
didn't
doing.
take off to manage.
They have all. I'm truly almost universally all gone on, and they're just doing such great, impressive things. Again, that's not me in any way, shape, or form. That is their natural talent coming through. I think I provided some helpful advice along the way, but I'm under no illusion that it was anything other than mostly just that they're all just impressive people. And I, to this day, still select for nice people. And there are plenty of people who are very talented on paper. You're just blown away. And then you meet them and, they spend most of the interview telling you how you're going to advise them. And I always think, wow, that's so off-putting. And there are plenty of talented people out there who are also wonderful human beings. Anne is absolutely one of them. Just such a nice person. Which is one reason why I think her students love her so much. Is she just doesn't tell you what you want to hear. She tells you what you need to hear, but she's just a kind person. She does first-class work. She's a fantastic role model for others. I've heard repeatedly that she's a very good mentor. I don't think I've had anything to do with any of that. If it was super, super tiny. And but yeah, I don't know. That was a horrible answer to that question. It's very difficult for me to answer. I'm not someone who focuses on successes probably enough. And I'm constantly armchair quarterbacking myself, going, why didn't I do that better? Like, why didn't I help this person better? And even years and years later, I think back to some things and think, oh gosh, I should have been a bit more supportive. And it's also hard to talk about this because I don't want to talk about specific incidents and things like that, which I'm sure Anne would love to talk about if it was just us, but this is not just us. So I'm sure she can appreciate.
We will enjoy putting you two
details
together with Lindsay Lee, one of her doc students at NAGC, and we'll see what we talk about.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. What do I want my legacy to be as an advisor is probably an easier question for me to answer. And it's someone who 10, 20 years after they've left working with me on a sort of a daily intimate basis, that they move on and they look back and go, okay, he did just enough to help me develop the independent skills that I needed. He's someone that I can call if I need advice, etc. Like he provided me with what I needed to make it to the next stage. He provided me with the right opportunities, the right advice, etc. If they even upon reflection can say, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as they say. I'd be pretty satisfied with that. I know that, Sally Reese, Jean Gubbins, Carolyn Callahan, all did that for me. Like I'm a better person and a more successful person because of their mentoring that got me to this point. I hope my students feel the same way about me, but that is a question for them.
Fantastic. Well, we will ask it. All right, that brings me to the end of my semi-structured protocol. Is there anything else you care to add for posterity before we sign off?
Yeah, just sort of general advice that I would give to people. As a faculty affairs dean, I'm constantly talking to junior colleagues about this. Probably the best piece of advice that I can have is in terms of like mentors. You should have mentors until the day you die, and that's not how we talk about mentoring. I have my standard handful of really valued colleagues and friends who are my most important mentors. But I use them all differently. So I have one mentor who, no matter how bad I screw up, when I call him, he is going to tell me that it's everyone else's fault and that I did nothing wrong and that I should actually not be embarrassed. I should be angry that they don't realize how lucky they are to know me. He is valuable. Always the first person I call whenever I screw something up, and he will give me this rousing speech that will at least take some of the sting off of my, stupidity. Carolyn is a second type of mentor for me. I'll call and say, okay, here's what I'm dealing with. We will very dispassionately analyze it. We'll sort of talk about, okay, here's, you probably should have done this, but, let's talk about strategies. And then I have a third sort of regular mentor. And he is someone who doesn't really have an education background. He does, but he doesn't. It's mostly business. And so he has a very pragmatic, outside of higher ed lens on how to solve some problems. And I'll say, okay, I'm kind of dealing with this. What would you do? His immediate response always is, okay, let's figure this out together. It's not, let's rehash it and do that, which is fine, because I've already done that with Carolyn probably, and she's really helped me understand where my footing was off and how I can start to fix it. And then I get a second set of sort of how to fix it recommendations from my other mentor. I don't care what your various mentors' roles are, just have mentors that you can go back to on a regular basis who have your best interest at heart. So that they can come to you, so that you can go to them, and you can use the advice that they give you to sort of grow from and learn from. I've also had a mentor, my friend Gary, experienced principal, and he was always like, one of the top rules of principal mentoring and coaching. You can complain about a problem once. You can't complain about it a second time, because that means you're just complaining to complain. You're not trying to solve the problem. So if you come back a second time and it's still a problem, it should be a different, more complex problem because you've been trying to solve it. So again, just, figure out which of your mentors can provide you the best type of information in certain, and the best types of feedback in certain situations. And sort of have that stable of like really valued friends and mentors who can help you. I hope I've done that for my own students and for lots of other people. Again, they will be the judge, but I have really valued that throughout my career. You can never have too many really good mentors.
All right, man. Advice for the ages. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chris.
Appreciate your time today, and we'll get this posted up and look forward to an extended conversation on these things at NAGC in Orlando.
I'm looking forward to it. Just a few short weeks here.
That's right. All right, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.